The notion of being convicted by a trial of your peers in the UK is now under attack. Precedents that have existed for thousands of years being undone by one vengeful foreigner in the right position at the right time. We're going to talk about it. We're also going to talk about the embarrassing state of the Senedd, with it being such a crime that firefighters were not allowed to take the knee for Black Lives Matter, disgusting anti-Welsh and anti-white, anti-British, anti-Western terrorist organisation. All that and more today on Voice of the Valleys. Why, hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Voice of the Valleys, yet again with your host, friendly neighbourhood far-right thug, always satirical, unless he's not, Mr. George Cresswell. Hope we're all doing well. Hope we're all having a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever we are. Going to speed through it today because I have not got long. So I've cut down on some of the things which I wanted to go through. Obviously, I spoke about this in a slightly longer video as well, which I put up recently. Just re-uploaded it, in fact, because I've discovered I'm not the best at picking background music for these videos, so I uploaded it completely music-free. So that's up on there. We talked about Lammy, Lame Brains, and I'll link the clip down below because it might go over some things which I forget to talk about today. I recorded it in the gym last night, and yeah, the Brits or British citizens, whatever, are now having their right to a jury as a key part of a fair trial eroded. Precedents that have existed for thousands of years, which, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, as we'll go now, the notion of being tried in a court of your peers, or at least needing more than one testimony in order to result in a conviction, is a very, very old precedent and principle indeed. It goes back even further than Christ himself. It goes back to the very, the very first books of the Bible, the Torah, when they're laying down the Mosaic law. You can go find it in the book of Deuteronomy. I'll read you the relevant passage as we go on to a little bit later. But as you may have known, or as you may have read, David Lammy has announced that he wants to scrap jury trials for most crimes, despite calling them fundamental to democracy. So another example of, again, the most basic, taken for granted freedoms that the British people have, especially when it comes down to, and rights, that the British people have, especially when it comes down to something as serious, right, as serious as you having your basic freedom to be a free person taken away, right? We are now going to get rid of the notion that a person cannot just be sent down and have these freedoms taken away by a single person in a position of power, i.e. a judge. They need to be convicted in a court of their peers. We're going to be doing away with that principle for all but the most serious crimes under David Lammy's new guidance, or under David Lammy's new reforms that he wants to bring in. So I'll bring this up on screen for you in a moment, this article. And the reality is, ladies and gentlemen, the cold, hard reality is that this is just an example. David Lammy in particular, because he's the person in a position of power to actually affect this, obviously. But this is the attitude. This is emblematic of the attitude that sadly many people have that have come into this country. They're very vengeful. They're very, very vengeful. And they actually want to do everything that they can to destroy our civilization and destroy us. And they're more than happy to tout how tolerant and how good diversity is and all of this, and how empathetic and all of that, whilst eroding, whilst destroying customs, principles, and the demographics of this country that have existed for thousands of years. Right, the very foundations of this country, of these countries rather. And our politicians have all been happy to go along with it and stab us at the back, as you know. These people, for various reasons, taking advantage of our self-flagellation of supposed violations of humanity with colonialism, the greatest, evils in recent memory, colonialism and all of this stuff. I'll say colonialism was wholly good, by the way. There were some bad things that happened, but to say that it was all bad, I think, is certainly not the case, not true. Well, what's been announced is that even after saying that juries are integral and fundamental to democracy, Lammy has announced that he plans to scrap them for all but the most serious crimes. So rape, murder, manslaughter, and other penalties, other crimes that carry penalties greater than 5 years. In leaked documents seen by the Telegraph, the Justice Secretary has proposed juries will only decide upon cases, as I said, murder, manslaughter, and other serious offences carrying more sentences of more than 5 years. As a lot of what we may deem serious offences, ladies and gentlemen, they don't quite carry penalties as much as 5 years. Not to mention, in this country anyway, you don't even get to go before a jury until you get to Crown Court. In order to get to Crown Court, you have to have committed a very serious offence. Otherwise, it'd be dealt with at the magistrate's level, which currently have, according to this article anyway, as you can see here, it says at the bottom here, magistrates' powers are to also be increased, extending their remit from offences carrying a maximum sentence of 1 year to 2 years, further eroding right to a trial. I can't help that this is because the establishment, government, know that the judges that they have in, for the most part, are not actual judges, at least in my opinion. They are political activists. They are activist judges, and they swallowed this woke ideology hook, line, and sinker, and they stick to it like a religious dogma. Right? Think of all the people that have gone to prison for social media posts, right? All the people that were denied bail, denied appeals, all of this stuff, like Wayne O'Rourke, who had to languish in prison, is currently still only out on license, right? Had to fulfill the entire sentence that he was given up until the point that he was put on license. Lucy Connolly denied her appeal. You know, whatever you think of him, you know, whether you think he's a traitor or he's a foreign asset or whatever. Tommy Robinson showing the documentary, right? Merely showing the documentary was what got him in contempt of court. And obviously then he was kept in isolation. And obviously then his appeals were denied and all of this stuff. Yet there's many people out there that have done extremely heinous crimes that we know have never even seen the inside of a courtroom. And that is due to the political system that we have in place, the political ideology that our government is hell-bent on, because it's hell-bent on destruction of Britain and the British people, the native British peoples. And this is just another step towards creating a system like we see in China, where, again, the globalist king at one point, you know, Klaus Schwab, who, again, our leaders, you know, Keir Starmer went to Davos to speak at the World Economic Forum. All the world leaders go to speak at the World Economic Forum. It's this, you know, the one of the big hot points, you know, the big central points of the globalists, right? This conference they go to speak to every year and lecture us on climate change, despite them emitting enough carbon, right, to offset anything Britain and anything probably all of Europe is going to do, not to mention what China's doing, but then also then clocking up enough miles in terms of air miles on their private jets and first class and all the rest of it to then go to the moon several times and back. Yeah, those guys. Yeah, those guys. And this is just another step in the descent towards that kind of system that China already has that these people want us to emulate. So as you know, in China, as an example, they have a massive CCTV, one of the most advanced, expansive, intrusive, camera system linked back to the central government. We covered it a little while ago. I can't remember the exact name that they call it. Oh, it's is it Urban Eye or something like that? You go find it in one of the past episodes that I've done. We talked about it. Literally, there was a video of it inside, and it's this massive screen. You know, honestly, it looks like something out of a sci-fi movie where you see the villains popping up as holograms on the screen, except it's all cameras, and they monitor every single little nook and cranny of the space to find what people are doing and observe them at all times. It's truly like Airstrip 1, just with you know, Chinese people, not British people, right? And then they catch, let's just say, example, easy one, because it's one that I covered in one of Jordan Peterson's videos where he was speaking either on a podcast or interview or conference, whatever it was. Let's just say a camera catches you jaywalking, something as small as jaywalking. Well, the camera catches you. It feeds back to the government official that's watching those cameras. They instantly make the determination that you're guilty. So you get no jury, no legal representation, right? No lawyer. You just get convicted straight away by somebody that's nowhere near you, nowhere inside of a courtroom, just based on what they see on camera. Camera's so sophisticated they can see who you are whilst you're not even looking at them, You know, you're walking away, they can track how you walk, measure your gait, and they can see who you are, even though you're not facing the camera. Then the social credit score is lowered, right? They're convicted of it, so they're fined or whatever it is. Their social credit score is lowered. And then all of the other penalties that come along with that, the social consequences, they're obviously not going to want to be near anybody, or other people are going to want to stay near them because their face will be plastered all up around the billboards, the electronic billboards and stuff like that. Stay away from this person, they're blacklisted or whatever, right? Because then you're going to be guilty by association, right? If you're seen with this person, if you're seen conversing with them, or if you're seen doing something for them, like I don't know, passing some money on to them or whatever, I don't know, whatever it may be, right? You'll be then have your social credit score lowered as well, guilt by association. And then your certain freedoms are taken away based on that, where, I don't know, whether it's, you know, ability to go to a public toilet, ability to buy something from a vending machine, even maybe your home, because we've seen that they can be made homeless at the flick of a switch. You know that Hassan Piker didn't tell you that when he was out in China recently, did he? But this is what this is paving the way for. This is what this is paving the way for. And the biggest thing is, ladies and gentlemen, the thing to understand is that the reason this has been such a slow burn, you know, the frog in the frog in the pan analogy, where you heat the water up slow enough and the frog's not going to notice, he's not going to jump out of the pan as he realizes he's slowly boiling to death. That's what the government is counting on. They're counting on people not noticing until it is absolutely too fucking late. Right, because they're just cranking the temperature up more and more and more and more and more. Think of how far back the problems with immigration go, particularly with regards to, like, you know, Pakistanis, British children, right? Goes all the way back to the mid-50s. That does. But the burn has been slow and slow and slow and gradually increasing, and people noticed it way back when. Right, we covered before how the attitudes very quickly changed on immigration, especially in areas like London, where you had 81.5% at one point in about 1956 or 1958, I believe it was, strongly against immigration and wanting, strongly in favor of immigration controls. 81.5% of people, and they were ignored, and their rights were trampled on. And this has been a deliberate effort, a long march, if you will, not just through our institutions, but across all aspects of our society, and everything has been reformed to suit the new globalist regime that they want to bring in, and they've been largely, so far, very, very successful in. But we'll soon find out what's going to happen with it next year. The excuse that they've given is that it is to battle a backlog, so I'll bring this up on screen again, to battle a quote-unquote record backlog of nearly 80,000 cases with many victims waiting years for justice. The documents warn that failure to ease the gridlock could lead to a wider collapse of the criminal justice system. Obviously, I don't buy it. I don't buy it, right? There's far more bigger incentives that they would be doing this for, right? As we've just talked to. And obviously the fact that it's completely hypocritical with David Lammy calling them integral to, a fundamental part of our democratic settlement is, you know, that's just a non sequitur. That's just a non-starter, if you will. Are we going to pretend that hypocrisy with regards to this government anyway, and any UK government, at least for my entire lifetime, is really even out of the ordinary at this point? It's just to show the entirety of the system, right? How really awful this is. Because you got to think, not only you got to deal with activists posing as judges, right? All you got to do then is catch a judge on a bad day. Catch a judge on a bad day, and that could be the difference between you getting, you know, a just sentence and an unjust sentence, right? All you got to do is catch a judge on a bad day. Is his wife or her husband, whatever it is, or her wife or his husband, whatever it is, was giving them some shit about something as he left the door of the house this morning, and now he's in a really fucking foul mood, and you're the first case of the day, right? You're the first case of the day on a Monday morning after they just had the fucking weekend, right? And just before he's going to work, they've had this big, massive fucking spat. You think he's going to be in a good mood? You think he's going to be, or she's going to be the best position to be impartial? And maybe that's when, a jury might come in handy there. A jury might come in handy there. But the biggest thing is as well, ladies and gentlemen, is what this is doing to thousands of years of British law principle, British laws and British principles, long before people like Lammy got here. 1215. 1215 was the original year that the Magna Carta was signed. King John forced into giving his stamp on the Magna Carta, which was given to him, right? And he was forced to sign it in response to what was deemed as tyrannical rule at the time. It was forced upon him by a group of powerful rebel barons, supported by the Archbishop of Canterbury, which at the time was Stephen Langton. This is from Grok, by the way. So if this is getting some stuff wrong, because I'm not a historian, right? I'm just going with the best that I can. I put Grok on expert mode, so he'd done a little bit of a long time thinking about it. So again, this is what was discussed in my in my video yesterday. If anything is wrong, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, such as names, Grok doesn't always get things 110%, right? Doesn't get things 100% of the time or 90% of the time, a lot of the time, right? Tends to be pretty good from what I've seen, right? A lot of times when I've gone and looked at the sources that Grok provides, tends to corroborate what he says, or it says. If this is wrong, however, leave it down below. Maybe you know more than me, and maybe you know more than Grok. Let's all learn. That's the most important part. They were fed up with John's disastrous and tyrannical rule. Main reasons revolving around excessive taxation and financial exploitation, arbitrary justice and abuse of feudal rights, and then a political crisis and civil war. So the 1215 charter, contained 63 clauses. The biggest one being here, clause 39, which, again, reading off of my screen here, says, quote, "No free man shall be arrested, imprisoned, dispossessed, outlawed, exiled, or ruined, except by lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land, implying basis of trial by jury and due process." I see what's being proposed here that's going to be going to legislative decision next year is going to be an affront to both of those things. And in fact, the principles, as I talked about before, for a conviction via testimony and witnesses being your peers, right, goes back even further. Goes back to the final book of the Torah, in fact, as one example, right? Where in Deuteronomy, Moses is laying out how the Lord wants somebody or the laws concerning witnesses, right? And then being able to convict someone for a crime, right? And I put all of these in the other one as well, in the other video as well. There's the screenshots in there. But for example, in section of Deuteronomy chapter 19, and you're ready to look at verse 15 for this, it's a nice, clear, concise, passage to see how the law was meant to work, right? And obviously then a lot of the customs that were taken, that were taken up rather as Western nations, all the way through Europe, all the way to the British Isles, right? As the Roman Empire became Christian, right? These principles and these laws were then uptaken, right? A single witness, this is Deuteronomy 19:15, right? Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 15. A single witness shall not suffice to convict a person of any crime or wrongdoing in connection with any offense that may be committed. Only on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses shall a charge be sustained. So given that, again, we weren't always Christian, obviously, and in many ways we're now in a post-Christian society, and we need to navigate that, and our future is obviously going to be dependent on how we navigate that. We obviously have serious problems. You can see how far back these principles go. This goes back, 2,000 years ago was the time of Christ, right? And Deuteronomy was, written, the time of Moses was long before Christ. Right? Thousands of years before that. So we're talking going back potentially, what? 6? Like between, say, 5 and 8,000 years? Somewhere around there, right? Obviously, that's quite a large bracket, but again, I'm not really too up on when these exact things were written, right? It was a long time before Christ, put it that way. There's a long time between Moses and Joshua and the 12 tribes, and then Christ the Messiah coming along, right? That's how long that precedent stood. And that doesn't mean that everybody was always perfect in dealing with it. It doesn't mean that, the judges were perfect and, the king's whole thing, right? They weren't perfect. Not saying that these systems were perfect, because humans are not perfect, right? But when you look at things how they turned out in the modern day and the reforms that are now being made in the modern day, can we at least say that we've yet to come up with a better system? And in many ways, what's being done to it in the modern day is making it worse and worse and worse. And you got to think the magistrates extending their power to many other kinds of crime, right? And taking away people's right to a jury for what we would deem quite serious crimes, right? There's many others. Now, I'm not a legal expert by any means, but you can have some which there's, particularly with regards to sexual crimes, there's actually some sexual crimes that would actually fall under this jurisdiction, fall under this legislative branch, where now they could just simply be decided by a judge, where I don't know whether they would have been decided by a jury before. So don't take this as legal advice. Do not take this as legal advice and as legal, expertise, because that's not my field. But there's some examples, because again, you do have some sexual crimes that could fall under this new legislation, depending on if they then go to high court or not and end up getting convicted, which they get maximum sentences of either life imprisonment or 10 years, 14 years, all of these things. There's many others that seemingly then, where you may have had the option to elect a trial by jury before, you won't get that opportunity now, right? So there are some clauses in, for example, the Sexual Offences Act of 2003, exposure, voyeurism, where they class as triable either way, which now seemingly you would actually lose your right to elect a trial by jury for. Some of them they have, if it's on a summary, which is basically when it's done in the magistrate's court, as far as I'm aware, you get, say, 12 months, right? And then if it's an indictment, it only goes up 2 years anyway for some of these crimes. Some of them, they go up a lot higher, but depending on if it's tried in summary, it could actually be a lot less, right? And as a result, you could then lose your ability to elect yourself for a jury trial, lose your right to elect yourself for a jury trial, and have to just submit yourself to one judge, right? And obviously then if that judge just comes in on a bad day, or if you happen to be of the wrong skin color, or you, happen to be of the correct, protected religion or whatever, you can see how there's a lot of room for judicial gerrymandering there. So it's undoing thousands of years, and I'll put some of these in the description as well, the actual links to the acts themselves. But again, some of them, legal documents can also be quite difficult to bloody read, right? I do think that they've done that intentionally so people won't read them, right? Because the state doesn't want you to know your rights. They don't want you to be up on all this stuff, right? But depending on if it's conviction by indictment or conviction on summary, which basically just means magistrate or Crown or Magistrates Court respectively, right? You have some of them which can be, for example, like as I said, exposure, voyeurism. You can have a maximum of 2 years imprisonment on indictment, or 6 months on summary. Cyber flashing, which is deemed as sending unsolicited photographs or films of genitals, right? Maximum of 2 years imprisonment. The biggest things are, there's even other ones on you which carry less prison time or less sentences than 5 years as well, ladies and gentlemen, with an animal penetration of a... And I think it's rather fortunate that this happened out in Marseille, out in France, right? The sexual activity in a public lavatory, which if you've seen that video, you know exactly what I'm on about. Fair to say, I believe he was a Newcastle United fan at the time of his life out there. But the important note here, which is from Grok, and they cite Grok cites something known as the Sentencing Academy, is that even for more serious offences like sexual assault, which is in Section 3 of the Sexual Offences Act 2003, which carry a maximum penalty of 10 years, The Sentencing Council guidelines provide for lower category cases, such as low culpability and harm, starting from community orders up to around 4 years. So then would this person then, depending on the exact circumstances of the case, lose their ability to elect trial by jury and then have to simply go before a judge? And now they've lost that right to be tried in a court of their peers and at least have that counterbalance against just purely one judge's judgment. Just we know judges are not infallible. Judges are not infallible, and many of them seem to be LARPing as political activists, or LARPing as judges, and they're actually political activists, enforcing the wrong speak and enforcing the thought crime legislations and letting really heinous criminals go free. I suppose we'll see. I suppose we'll see what happens when it goes to legislative next year, because these are going to be legislated on next year, right? But again, the bigger problem is, and I know a lot of people are not going to, I don't think a lot of people are going to like when I say this, right? I said it quite bluntly in that video from yesterday, but it needs to be said bluntly. These are, nothing really. I think presumption of innocence very easily could be next, right? Presumption of innocence very easily could be next. These are your fundamental rights that are being stripped away from thousands of years of your history by, and this is the reality, a vengeful foreigner that hates these lands and hates the people, right? That is the reality. Because he's also being one of the big pushers for Britain to reckon with its colonial past and been one of the people at the forefront of Caribbean nations pressing Britain for trillions, yes, trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions in slavery reparations, despite the fact that all our debts to slavery were paid 10 years ago. A debt that really we never even had to incur. We chose to on moral grounds, yet we are still being hounded for it. That's what weakness brings, ladies and gentlemen. We've shown ourselves to be weak, that we're going to self-flagellate unnecessarily, and we should not be surprised when people who have no reason other than more than anyone else, right? As a people, we have more reason to take care of ourselves than anyone else, right? We shouldn't be expecting anyone else to be taking care of us, right? So we have our people for. We shouldn't be surprised then when people want to come in from outside and take advantage of us at every single turn. And that's what governments are doing. That's why they're sending their waste here, forms of their prisoners and stuff like that. And now they're trying to fleece the taxpayer for even more. Even more, mind you, than was ever owed to them. These people, by the way, never were slaves in the British Empire, right? They were part of the transatlantic slave trade. Maybe they enslaved themselves. Why do we have to pay for it? Because they're simply trying to fleece more money out of us because we've shown that we're just going to bend over and hold our arsehole open and say, have a go of it, take us for everything that you can. Or rather, it's the government holding the taxpayers' arse open and telling everybody from the world to come and have a go of it. That's what they're doing. As you can see here, where was it? David Lammy has said there needs to be a reckoning with Britain's colonial past. Caribbean nations will press Labour MPs for slavery reparations in a meeting next week. This is from 14th of November this year, so not very long ago. The Reparations Commission of the Caribbean Committee, or Community, CARICOM, a political grouping of 15 states, will hold a meeting with MPs as it seeks compensation from former colonial powers. I've been an empire for a long time. A lot of these places have had independence, a lot of places now that we are still being, harangued about. Think about that. All of the foreign aid we got to send to different places or whatever to all these failed states, right? They've had their independence for, a few generations now. What's it anything to do with us? Obviously, they decided that they didn't want us there, right? Rhodesia is a great example. The British there, decided that they weren't wanted, right? And then the monarchy and government decided they were going to do everything they can there to result in Rhodesia's destruction. As a result, then, Zimbabwe ended up going from electricity and infrastructure to candles and poverty. And somehow that's our fault. Somehow that's our fault. Despite the fact there's now been Zimbabwe for, decades now. And they've had plenty of time to turn it around. And they still just want to blame us. It is the first official delegation of the Reparations Commission to visit Britain, and comes after estimates the Caribbean countries could seek £18 trillion as recompense for slavery. People that never had slaves paying reparations to people that never were slaves, to the tune of £18 trillion. That's what the rest of the world, or that's what many areas of the world think of us. Think of us. And hey, they want to judge us. A lot of the areas of the world, and these people want to judge us by what we've done in the past. How about we start judging many people of the world by what they do in the present? Right? We've been told that we can't do that. We've been told it's offensive. We've been told it's not allowed. Why don't we? That stuff's going on today. We finished paying our debts to slavery after policing it and eliminating it throughout the empire 10 years ago. An effort that, the large part of it was concluded, a long time ago in terms of actually abolishing it, right? But the lasting effects were paid for by successive generations of British people that were never, ever involved. Every single debt that could ever be conceived in this regard has been paid. Many people who never had any direct involvement with it, and many people whose only involvement in it would have been the abolition of it, yet had to pay for it across generations. Their descendants had to pay for it. It only finished getting paid in 2015. Yet they want to fleece us more and more and more. And if we get to be judged, or we have to be judged by the supposed evils that we've done in the past, how about we start judging people by the evils that they still do in the present? We start looking at areas of Africa and areas of the Middle East and Asia and things like this, where this trade is still going on as normal as it is for us to go down the shops. More slaves today than ever in history. More slaves today than ever in history. But no, it's us that need to be held to a uniquely high standard, only emboldened by our continual self-flagellation and not being willing to stand up for ourselves. It has to end. It has to end, otherwise we will end. It has to end, otherwise we will end. Right? And that comes down to even more things then, like demographic replacement and all these things. The self-flagellation, the virtue signaling, all of this stuff has to end. Otherwise we will end. It's going to start with getting vengeful foreigners out of power. And it's going to start with, it's going to continue with more initiatives such as reversing demographic decline, and also then realizing the ways that we've been complicit and stuff like that. There's been a debate online, a lot of conflict online. Bob from Speaker's Corner has kind of been at the heart of it. And I sort of realize now, a lot of the people whom, when they've been pressed before, Rikki Doolan was one of them. I've seen this from conversing with more people sort of on the ethno-nationalist side of politics. When you press them enough, they will then, and there's a great video on this, which is sort of like a cutting of a debate between Laura Towler and Rikki Doolan that was 5 years ago. And Rikki Doolan in this debate basically admitted that he doesn't think that there's such a thing as a native British person, and that the British can't be replaced because there's no such thing as a native British person, because it's all culture, it's all values, it's all this stuff, right? So ancestry doesn't matter. There's no such thing as a native British person, right? And he seems to still be sort of going with that line. A lot of others are going with that line as well. And I sort of downplayed the effects of immigration in the replacement of the native British people. And they'll highlight things like as being frankly, yes, a genocide against the British as well. Absolutely, that's something that we've been complicit in. Absolutely. But it's not the only reason. It's not the only reason. And to say there hasn't been a concerted effort to demographically replace us with immigration, I think is truly foolish. I think it's either foolish or disingenuous. One of the two. Either somebody just is completely ignorant of it, or they know it is and they're trying to peddle a different line anyway. I spoke about it with Joe Marsh. It's sort of like a genocide an attempted genocide at the very least, and one that's ongoing, that's come in two parts. Get the native population to diminish themselves and remove themselves from the gene pool. That's all these other things, contraception, rise of feminism, people not being in a good family structure anymore, right? Less focus on children seen as a burden, right? Female empowerment, all of this stuff. If you want a good family structure and you want to be the head of the family as a man, you're seen as an evil patriarchal figure, whatever, right? Tyrannical patriarch. So all of that stuff. But then also the masses and masses of numbers of people coming in that, yes, in many ways have made communities unsafe and low trust simply because they have completely shifted the demographics and the culture and everything like that. And many people now, due to things like the effects it's had on the economy, due to the effects it's had on all other things, right? In many ways, either can't have kids, or it's not as financially feasible to do so. They're going to spend so much time working 2 jobs and all of this stuff. You've got both parents working multiple jobs or whatever. Or they don't want to have them because of how unsafe the communities are. There's all of these different factors, okay? And some have more weight than others. But to imply it's only just down to one side, I think is very, very either ignorant or disingenuous, in my opinion. Because there has been a concerted effort, right, through propaganda, through the school system, to normalize this sort of ethnic replacement, if you will, in Britain. There absolutely has. I think that's undeniable. But we'll see where it goes. It's going to start with getting very vengeful foreigners out of power and understanding that the only people that should be allowed to hold power, political power in these lands, are going to be natives of these lands. And that's just going to have to be the reality. It's one thing when our people commit an act of treason and betray, right? It's another thing when we've allowed foreigners to come in and do it. That's another thing. Now, this is something interesting, ladies and gentlemen, that I wanted to bring up. Because something happened in the Senedd, right? Fire service have been scolded for refusing to take the knee for BLM, the race Marxist terrorist organization, right? Speaking of terrorists, I was going to cover it today, but I don't know whether you've seen that. I think it's 3 National Guard have been killed out in America at the moment, seemingly by an Afghan national. And the response of it has been quite telling, actually. I'll touch on this first, because it's just a difference between 2 systems of government at the moment. One of them hell-bent on destroying their people and their culture. The other one is actually taking steps to resolve it. So the USCIS, which is the account of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, has announced in the aftermath of this, effective immediately. So whereas when all of the stuff was going on, we know about, say, for example, this is the Afghan that killed Wayne Broadhurst, right? Or all of the other ethnic minorities that have been involved in Britain and child gangs and all of this stuff. Whereas our government has constantly labeled people talking about these things as racist, as Islamophobic, as all of this stuff, xenophobic, etc. The USCIS has announced that effective immediately, processing of all immigration requests relating to Afghan nationals is stopped indefinitely, pending further review of security and vetting protocols. The protection and safety of our homeland and the American people remains our singular focus and mission. That's what they put up today. It was at 3:20 a.m. in the UK. I'm not sure what time it was out in America. Shows the response of 2 governments when an attack has been committed against them. You had generations of young British girls being sacrificed on this altar of multiculturalism, diversity, all of this stuff, right? And all of the political correctness and political persecution and state overreach, state tyranny that had to go along with that. And in this instance now, this has happened with the National Guard, right? And they say, nah, we're stopping everybody from coming in immediately. If only, that would be a start. It would by no means solve Britain's problems. But for me, it would be a start. For me, it'd be a start. Be like, or like Operation Stovewood. Let's take the Pakistanis, for example. Long time ago, when people were trying to talk about this and we knew exactly who the perpetrators were, right? Let's stop all immigration from those areas. In fact, let's stop all immigration from those areas and related areas, whether it be on ethnic similarity and also then religion. Oh, how many young girls could have been saved, but no. Our government is more focused on scolding fire services and public institutions, whatever, for refusing to cow down to woke ideologies. So South Wales Fire and Rescue made it so that people couldn't take the knee to Black Lives Matter, I believe it was, which I fully support. I believe Black Lives Matter is a terrorist organisation. Hannah Blythyn, one of the members of the Senedd, I believe she's Plaid Cymru, but I could be wrong on that, rather predictably called it repugnant and reprehensible, in addition to a bunch of other things. And then went on about they have brought disgrace to a service and tarnished it with high regard to which firefighters are rightly held. I'm going to show you some images and some video in a little bit, ladies and gentlemen, on why that might also not be the case. They're not specifically from South Wales Fire and Rescue Service, which it seems in this instance are doing something right. But we'll go over some other examples of where tarnishing things that are, supposedly held in high regard. A lot of places, a lot of fire services in particular, have done a great job of doing that themselves. But I'll bring this up on screen for you now in a moment, ladies and gentlemen. This is straight from the floor of the Senedd, and we should be used to this right now, right? We should really, really be used to this by now. Video coming on screen right now.
Firefighters being forbidden to take the knee. All of these are, of course, repugnant and reprehensible. The report was published last week on the 3rd of January, and it is, in a word, damning. The headline finding is that discriminatory attitudes and behaviours exist at all levels, up to and including senior management. It'd be too simplistic to focus on the specific incidents identified in the report, shocking and horrific as they are. Misogynistic remarks, excuses banter, sexualised images of staff in uniform, homophobic Christmas decorations, or firefighters being forbidden to take the knee. All of these are, of course, repugnant and...
Can I just say, first off, before we carry on, can I just say, she went on about misogynistic remarks, excuses banter. Again, I spoke about this with the Sergeant Kate Evans when she was struck in the back by Palestine Action activist with a sledgehammer. Obviously, it's completely inexcusable. If you're sorry for her, she's recovering well, obviously. Can I just point out, though, and this is another thing where I can't remember the comedian that made this joke, but the reality is, if you had a single-sex workspace, like just with men, the way that it was for the majority of time before, you wouldn't need HR departments, and you wouldn't have this problem. I feel that's something that needs to be pointed out. This could be solved very easily, but I don't think many people are ready for that kind of discussion.
As they are misogynistic remarks, excuses banter, sexualised images of staff in uniform, homophobic Christmas decorations, or firefighters being forbidden to take the knee. All of these are, of course, repugnant and reprehensible. Those responsible for them have brought disgrace to the service and tarnished the high regard in which firefighters are rightly held.
Disgrace. They brought disgrace to the service, ladies and gentlemen, by not taking the knee, by not showing subservience to woke religion, by not taking the knee and bowing, at the altar and grave of a serial, criminal, drug addict, right? And the race Marxists that used it as an excuse to riot and commit acts of terror. That's what brings shame on the fire service. Not actually getting to the fire to solve it, right? And showing, aptitude, competence, all of these things. Do you want to know what I think brings more shame and tarnishes the reputation of these institutions more, ladies and gentlemen? What I think tarnishes the reputations of institutions like this even more are videos like this. This is from Avon. It's a little while ago. This is from Pride this year. Avon Fire and Rescue. Their promotional video showing that how they were going to be celebrating Pride. And it actually puts a lot of these things, the grievances that many people would have with regards to this, on display, in my opinion, as you will see in a moment. Just have a look at this, ladies and gentlemen, and try not to be sick.
Fire service.
Very important. Are you ready for Pride?
I'm ready for Pride. I'm in.
Hello?
Hello, it's Control. Are you ready for Pride?
I'll be there.
I'm going to put a pause there. Anybody else think that them getting ready for Pride has harmed their competence in some way? Obviously, I know it's a joke. But this is what people can expect from their fire service. He goes to use the pole, and he falls. I was saying, what happens if he breaks his leg? I know I'm taking this super seriously, ladies and gentlemen, but if we're talking about tarnishing the reputation of our, the high standards that firefighters are held to, when it comes to their blatant political activism, are we not allowed to, do these things with a little bit of extra scrutiny, to say the least? This is their virtue signaling, and in their want to virtue signal and fall over themselves to virtue signal, he's literally fallen down the pole. And surely that would then affect his capability to do his duties. Obviously, we know it's completely fake, he's completely fine, and it was a mannequin, but point still stands. I think these institutions are doing a fine job of tarnishing their own reputations.
I'm in.
Hello? I'm in. I'm in.
I'm just going to say, with all this stuff, the house or whatever it is already burnt down. It's already burnt down. Absolute travesty. Absolute travesty. And obviously they're making sure they include the full flag, to symbolize child mutilation and all of these things that the Pride movement has increasingly become more and more about. And in fact, it doesn't actually end there. Ladies and gentlemen, we're supposedly holding our firefighters and whatever to high standards. Then explain this. So in fact, that your firefighter and his, in his zeal to fall over himself quite literally to virtue signal, literally fell down the fucking pole. Right, if your gag was to be believed. Would we then ask about competence? Would we then be okay to ask about competence? And stuff like that? But it doesn't end there, ladies and gentlemen. Pride being another big one. Pride being another big one that seems to bring no end of shame in these scenarios. And this one I wanted to bring up in particular because it's rather a lot more sinister. It's a lot more sinister, as we'll see in a moment. Check this out. This is from Nottinghamshire, I believe. This is another Pride event. And as you can see, this was last year's. But I'm going to skip through these images in a moment. There's one very, very troubling at the end, which I think really, really tarnishes the reputations of these, supposed, elite firefighting units or whatever. Not to mention how embarrassing it is, for a start. Not to mention I thought these services were not meant to be political in any way, and they literally got the Pride flag with the additional elements, that are synonymous with the Pride flags you see inside of classrooms, right, to symbolize child mutilation and all this stuff. They literally brought a young child here on top of this lady's shoulders, presumably a lady anyway, who is quite clearly autistic. And in fact, I believe that would I be correct in saying that on the ear defenders here, the A would actually be designed to convey to somebody looking on that these are not just ear defenders worn for no reason, it's because the child is seemingly autistic? This doesn't harm the reputation and tarnish the reputation of our supposed elite firefighting units or elite firefighting forces or whatever? I think it does. So when are our firefighters supposed to be about, child mutilation and kids born in the wrong bodies, and especially these young, vulnerable children, like this child here seemingly with autism, who's been brought to this, march seemingly by a parent or carer or whatever it may be. Obviously, he's not going to know what he's there for. He cannot know what he's participating in. And he's also being used in political propaganda. Which, if many of these activists had their way, the minute he maybe shows a fascination with something that would be deemed as something stereotypical female or girly or whatever, they want to inject him with hormones. And they want to start calling him, instead of maybe his name is Bradley, they want to start calling him Brianna or something like that, and do irreparable damage to the one body and the one life that he has been given. When not only is he just a child normally, when they obviously don't know what they're getting into anyway because they're children, this child seemingly would have another disadvantage. And I don't say that to mock. I don't say that with any, hatred or anything like that, or to seem insensitive. It's just the reality of the situation. Now you see it. You see that the data kind of seems to bear this out as well. One of the biggest victims of the trans cult when it comes to children are autistic children, because they have that additional element of confusion due to their condition. And here they are being used as propaganda, political propaganda, outright shameless political propaganda by our supposed, high standards fire services, this one being Nottinghamshire. So good on the South Wales Fire Service for actually seeming to stand up and exercise a little bit of a backbone with regards to these things. And I should say, no, we're not going to go along with your woke shit. And yeah, we're not going to support anti-British, anti-Western, anti-freedom, anti-white especially, race Marxist terrorist organizations. Well done, South Wales Police. Last couple of stories now, ladies and gentlemen, that I want to go through. This is quite interesting. This goes to show, again, when you think about the judicial system that we talked about before, think about cases like this. Think about, this woman now being hauled up in front of a judge or whatever, and that judge either being a political activist disguised as the judge, again, be wary of wolves in sheep's clothing, or that it happens to fall on a bad day. A British mother has been convicted, of a hate crime, because, and you might want to watch this next section on Rumble, if you can, because I'm probably going to have a fair bit of this censored on YouTube, obviously, for a homophobic text about a man who beat her up. So this lady, I'll bring this image up on screen. So this lady got beat up by a man, right? British mother. I'll tell you her name now. I'll quickly pop back to the article. A British single mother of 4 has been convicted of a hate crime for sending a text message calling a man who beat her up, and I'll just quickly recrop this a moment to bring this up on screen. She called him in a text message, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, she sent to a friend, and now the supposed friend ratted her out to the police and got it done for hate crime. She called him. That's the extent of her crime. That's what she's been convicted for. She's been convicted for not showing the requisite sympathy for the sexual proclivities of the man who beat her. So you can see here. Elizabeth Kinney, 34, sending in a text message calling a man who beat her up a while her attacker was never prosecuted. And yet our leaders, our politicians, think that we'd be better off without juries. Without juries. Since the current system failed her, what makes you think that the new system's going to work any better? Elizabeth Kinney, 34, care worker from Tranmere in northwest England sent a heated series of messages to a former friend last year describing how a mutual male acquaintance had beaten her so badly she needed hospitalization and included photos of her injuries. She was later reported to police for using the word to describe the man, who has not been identified, makes you wonder why, and charged with malicious communications offences. Kinney pleaded guilty to causing to be sent by public communication network an offensive, indecent, obscene or menacing message in Sefton Magistrates Court last week, where she was given a 12-month community order with 72 hours of unpaid work and 10 rehabilitation activity days. A grossly extended struggle session for 2 syllables. For 2 syllables. I'm going to go a little bit further just for the sake of it, and just basically saying, you know, come at me. The aspiring nurse said the messages, which were not revealed in court, were a thoughtless rant, but JP Woff, or whatever you say, says he uplifted her sentence because of the homophobic content. This what makes nations like America currently hold all the cards, and when people call us basically a vassal state of the US, they have a good point, right? This what makes nations laugh at us. Not laugh with us about, oh, look at this area of the world and how primitive it is and all of this stuff, right? No, not laugh with us. Laugh at us. Because our courts seemingly thought that it was more important not just to prosecute, but uplift the sentence of a 34-year-old mother of 4 for one word which was sent in a text message, in a private communication, not even directed towards the person themselves. Words, in this instance, were deemed worse than hospitalization. That's where we are in the UK. I think it's everyone's duty to drop the unsayable word in the comments. Now, again, that's not asking everybody to comment, obviously. But it's not even a case of being, quote-unquote, homophobic or anything like that. It would just be an example, like I speak about silent acts of political protest. It wouldn't be a silent act of political protest. It would be more of an overt one. Just for the case of somebody should be able to use this word if they want to. And it wasn't even used at the person who beat her. And some friend you had who would then go and rat you out for something so menial. Some friend that you've got right there. So it does seem that Ms. Kinney here might seem to need to pick her friends a little bit better. But that's where we are. They won't even name the guy, mind you, that beat her, right? Because he hasn't been charged or prosecuted. But they were quick enough to prosecute her for a single word that was not even directed at him, that was sent in a private text message to a friend. Understand where we are. Understand where we are. The law, quote-unquote the law, justice system, whatever it is not on your side. And it has been for a long time. They see the feelings of a woman beater who hospitalized this woman as more important than not only her getting hospitalized, but her feelings and her outlook on the situation, simply because she used one word that she wasn't supposed to use. She said this in a rant, and then that's when it was decided that, nope, he's clearly the victim in this situation, despite the fact he'd hospitalized her. But the bigger thing is, again, ladies and gentlemen, when we're talking about speech, when we're talking about the restrictions on British people's freedoms to simply say the words that they want because they're deemed offensive. Offence, it's only offensive from one person's perspective. And you're seeing here, when you make laws based on subjectivity, the kind of tyranny that you can get things into. Kind of tyranny that you can get into. Because who's to decide that this is offensive? You see all manner of people online getting away with using the term gammon. Well, he was a quite large account on X, Esheru Kwaku, I believe is his name. He said in his status not so long ago, to all the gammony people. Perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine when racism goes in the right direction. It's perfectly fine when any comment, any derogatory comment to do with someone's sexuality goes in the right direction. Right? But when it goes in the quote-unquote wrong direction, you end up... Well, what can you even say? What can you even say? There's no words to describe this. There's no way to describe the miscarriage of justice that took place with regards to this. The fact that she had to serve this sentence, even though it was never a prison sentence, right? The fact that she was prosecuted at all is absurd. But she got hospitalized, and her assailant never faced any justice. And when she talked about him in confidence with somebody who she thought was a friend, she used a word that she wasn't supposed to use because it's offensive. She's then the target for the state. But let's take the juries out. Let's take the juries out and everything will miraculously get better. Thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you enjoyed it. Got more stories I want to recap, so we'll go over all of those another day. Hopefully this Saturday evening, be sitting down to go through that Steve Law's conversation in full, so stay tuned. Have a good morning, afternoon, evening, and night, wherever you are. Again, check down below if you want to reach out with any tips or any stories you'd like me to cover, or whatever, especially if you'd like to blow the whistle or anything like that. Leave them down below. Use the email address down in the description. Have a good morning, afternoon, evening, good night. Thank you for watching. Hoil Vada, see you next time. You take care now. Godspeed.